Hello everyone, my name is Elisa, and today I'm going to talk about how Gothic architecture began in France, and why the Basilica of Saint Denis is considered the birthplace. The Basilica of Saint Denis is located at 1 Rue de la Légion d'Honneur, 93200 Saint Denis, France. It sits just north of Paris and still stands today as a church and a historical monument to some. Maybe a museum, maybe a graveyard to some. In this podcast presentation, I will speak about how Gothic architecture was not a new building style, it was a reflection of medieval religious belief, political authority, and social hierarchy. By studying Saint Denis, we can see how architecture expresses the values of the people who built it through its design and ongoing popularity. Gothic architecture began in 12th century in northern France. According to Smart History, it developed out of a Romanesque architecture, but introduced important structural innovations. Gothic architecture was introduced to pointed arches, ribbed vaults, flying buttresses, large stained glass windows. Before Gothic designs were implemented, churches were heavy and fortress-like. They had thick stone walls, small windows, and rounded arches. To those of you that do attend churches, you may be used to a plain, fortress-like, thick stone wall, small window type of church. These implemented basic, specific religious meaning apart from the Gothic architecture that had the pointed arches and more of a dramatic design. Fun fact, medieval builders did not call this style Gothic. That term was used later during the Renaissance as an insult, suggesting it was barbaric, like the Goths. Today, we see it as one of the greatest architectural achievements in European history, and personally, one of my favorites. The Basilica of Saint Denis is often called the first Gothic building. It became famous under Abbot Suger, who oversaw renovations beginning around 1140. Saint Denis was extremely important because it was the burial site of nearly every French king from the 7th to the 18th century. Fun fact, over 70 kings and queens of France are buried there. This made Saint Denis both a religious and political center. It wasn't just a church, it was a symbol of French royal identity, and for some, maybe a graveyard. Because of Suger's rebuilding project, especially the choir and ambulatory, Saint Denis became the architectural model for later Gothic cathedrals with the same design choices that used domes, stone skeletons, which I'll get into soon, stained glass. Abbot Suger.
Hello everyone,
My name is Elisa, and Abbot Suger was not an architect in the modern sense, but he was an influential religious figure and political figure. He was an advisor to King Louis VII of France and acted as regent while the king was away on crusade. Suger believed that beauty and light could bring people closer to God. According to the Smart History video on Saint Denis, Suger wrote about how material beauty could elevate the soul toward the divine. So when he rebuilt Saint Denis, he intentionally used gold and precious materials, elaborate sculptures with details and emotions, large stained glass windows. For Suger, architecture was theology made visible. One of the most important innovations of Saint Denis was the use of stained glass to create what Suger described as divine light. The Metropolitan Museum of Art explains that Gothic churches aimed to create a heavenly atmosphere on earth. Fun fact, medieval stained glass was so expensive and complex that glassmakers were considered highly specialized craftsmen. The colored light inside Saint Denis would have been overwhelming to medieval visitors. Imagine entering a dark stone building and suddenly being surrounded by glowing red, blue, and gold light. Us humans, without the additional features of buildings, we're used to sunlight being golden, maybe white. This experience was meant to make people feel the presence of God or His holiness. Gothic architecture was not just spiritual, it was highly technical to many. The ribbed vault allowed ceilings to be taller without collapsing. I believe they add more pressure that allows the arch to hold. The pointed arch distributes weight more efficiently than the rounded Romanesque arch. It has less of a heavy load sitting on top. It can be evenly distributed on both sides. The flying buttress supported the building from the outside, allowing walls to be thinner and filled with glass. Fun fact, flying buttresses can be called stone skeletons. Do you remember what I mentioned earlier? Because they act like external support bones for the building. This shows that medieval builders were highly skilled engineers, not primitive craftsmen as they are sometimes portrayed. In order to understand why Gothic architecture developed in France, we need to understand medieval society as a whole. France in the 1100s was deeply Christian. Religion shaped daily life, politics, education, and even economics. There was a strict social hierarchy that included the Pope, bishops and abbots, nobility, and peasants. The church was central to both spiritual and political authority. Cathedrals symbolized order, stability, and divine approval of the monarchy. So, when Saint Denis was rebuilt, it reinforced both religious belief and royal legitimacy that brought Christians and religious people together, which to this day it does now. Churches, cathedrals, mosques, wherever your prayer location may be. It holds the energy of the previous members and of the religion that bring the energy to pray and praise their God. In this case, the cathedral, they praise God and their saints and their angels, like most Christians and Catholics. It is often said that Gothic architecture was invented at Saint Denis. However, Britannica explains that Gothic architecture evolved gradually from Romanesque traditions. This means it was not a sudden break, but a development over time and experimentation with different designs. Also, while Abbot Suger is remembered, the architects and builders themselves are mostly anonymous, which in recent times is rare. Usually now, an architect would want to be known or acknowledged. They'll have a website, they'll want their name painted on the side, or they'll want their name scripted onto the wall, whether it be a sculpture or a painting or an art piece. We want to be acknowledged now. When we closely examine Gothic architecture, we see embedded values. For example, verticality can equal spiritual aspiration, symmetry can equal order and divine harmony, scale can equal power and authority. The CCFS Sorbonne article explains that Gothic architecture reflected the strength and ambition of medieval France. The building itself becomes a document of medieval belief by telling us how people understood God, kingship, and society. Today, when people visit Saint Denis or other Gothic cathedrals, they often describe feeling it in awe. They're overwhelmed. They're in love, in a way, with the design, with the feeling it emits, with the safe space they can visit and take notes on. The height makes visitors feel small. It gives the feeling of acknowledgement to the building. Makes it a museum feeling. The light creates emotional intensity due to the multiple color variations and shadows, which isn't very popular in most buildings. The repetition of arches creates rhythm and order. Again, not very popular in most buildings. the Metropolitan Museum of Art emphasizes that Gothic architecture was designed to shape human experience. I agree due to the interactive design outcomes that influence the Gothic creations, such as stained glass. Even without sharing medieval beliefs, modern visitors still feel the power of the space. Again, most homes aren't in the Gothic architecture design. They're, especially now, mostly modern, very plain, very sleek, sharp designs. After Saint Denis, Gothic architecture spread rapidly. Major examples include Notre Dame de Paris, excuse my pronunciation, Chartres Cathedral, Reims Cathedral. According to Smart History and other sources, France became the center of Gothic innovation. Later, the style spread to England, Germany, Spain, and Italy. Fun fact, Italian Gothic cathedrals like Milan Cathedral adapted the style but often kept more classical elements. This shows how architectural ideas travel and change across cultures, just how architecture students can take prompts and create their own version of something. Just how many classes I have taken, many classes you have taken. That is our duty. Originally, Saint Denis was a symbol of living royal power. Today, it is preserved as a monument and tourist site. It is studied by art historians, architects, and medieval scholars. Its meaning has shifted from an active political center to a historical heritage site. For some, a graveyard, for some, a museum. This change shows how architecture can survive even after the society that built it transforms throughout time and wear and tear. So, what does this research lead us to reconsider? First, Gothic architecture was not just an artistic creativity. It was shaped by religious theology, royal authority, economic growth, engineering innovation. Second, it challenges the idea that medieval Europe was technologically backwards. Third, it shows that architecture reflects cultural values. This ties into the design interests from every architect themselves, whether they like modern, classical, mid-century modern, Gothic. One missing perspective may be the voices of workers and ordinary worshippers who may feel the honor of being a part of the building or design, or just surrounding the energy of the Gothic builds that creates such exciting feelings. And it's not that they go not acknowledged, it is just the building is very important to many that the praise aims to the building. Again, it ties in with the design, with the different and unusual designs, again, such as the ribbed arches, the stained glass, and the domes. When we connect all the scales, on an extra large scale, we see medieval Christianity and the rise of France as a powerful kingdom. On a large scale, we'll see Saint Denis as a royal abbey. On a medium scale, we'll see the church's structural system. On a small scale, we'll see stained glass, vault ribs, and sculpted details. Now, all levels reflect the same values: hierarchy, devotion, order, and divine light. France invented Gothic architecture not just by building differently, but by shaping a worldview that architecture could express through these small but impactful design choices. And mind you, stained glass wasn't the easiest to create. To conclude and summarize the talk, we went over how the Basilica of Saint Denis, located just outside Paris, became the birthplace of Gothic architecture in the 12th century, and how it opened up new design category for many architects, including myself. Under Abbot Suger, new structural techniques and theologies ideas transformed church design. And let's not forget, Gothic architecture reflected medieval beliefs about God, power, and social order. After studying this building, we see how architecture can act as evidence of cultural values. France did not simply invent a style, but it created a new architectural language that reshaped Europe and to this day reshaped the teaching and discoveries that professors can share with students or architects all over the world. Thank you.